Hello students, welcome to Political Science class. Myself, Mrs. Swati Prashant Hazare from GES HL High School, English Medium, Ozar Township, Nasik. Today we are going to learn Political Science. Political Science of Standard 9th from Maharashtra State Board, English Medium Syllabus, Chapter number 2, India's Foreign Policy. In the previous lesson, we learnt about international system and its nature and the Cold War and its effects. Today we are going to understand India's role in the context of the world. While entering into political, social, economic, cultural transactions with other nations, we wish to achieve certain objectives. These transactions are based on certain principles and these are included in the foreign policy. In this chapter, we will learn the meaning of foreign policy and the factors that influence it. See, foreign policy, meaning and importance. All countries are members of the international system. No country is completely self-sufficient. There is mutual dependence in the international system. International system means what I taught you in the previous lesson, means in the first chapter. Exchange and interaction takes place among the nations in the world. They enter into the treaties with one another. This system of the interdependence of the sovereign states is called international system. No country in the world is totally self-sufficient in every respect. All countries are dependent on one another for different reasons. Also, the relations between nations being friendly and based on cooperation and understanding is beneficial for all. Whenever is when there is international peace and security, every country will be able to create favorable conditions for the development of their peoples. So, in this context, every country has to decide the nations with which it should be friendly, in which bloc it should participate, or what position it should take in international relations. Such decisions should be made thoughtfully. The theoretical framework in which such decisions are taken is called foreign policy. Every sovereign and independent nation decides its foreign policy. Means a foreign policy is a set of political goals that define how a sovereign country will interact with other countries of the world. Or every nation has policies about its internal dealings as also about its relations with other nations. Such a policy is called foreign policy. Every sovereign nation means a sovereign nation has the freedom to take the right decisions for the welfare of the people living in its region. The countries that are free from external control and supreme with regards to internal matters, carrying on their work independently, are called sovereign nations. Foreign policy plays an important role in international relations because according to the principles of foreign policy, country takes decisions about how and what kind of transactions it would carry out with other nations. Next, international interest. National interest. National interest and foreign policy are closely connected to each other. National interest implies the means by which the independence and sovereignty of the country are safeguarded. National interest also includes efforts to achieve economic development and steps to increase power and influence in world politics. Preserving the sovereignty of our country, giving priority to economic development, and protecting our interest in the foreign relations is known as national interest. While conducting political, economic, trade related, and cultural transactions with other nations, the nations must take care that there is no threat to their independence. The factors of national interest are defense, the protection of our country's independence, sovereignty, and integrity is the highest national interest. It means defense. Second one, economic development. Economic development is regarded as vital to protect national interest. An economically weak nation will not be able to maintain its independence. Hence, economic development is understood to be an important national interest, next only to defense. Next, national interest and foreign policy. National interest and foreign policy. National interest is fostered through foreign policy. Means national interest and foreign policy are closely connected. I told you national interest is considered to be the goal and foreign policy is considered to be the means to achieve it. Goals of nations change with changing times. Accordingly, the foreign policy also changes to suit the national interest. These changes are reflected in the foreign policy. Therefore, foreign policy is always dynamic. Foreign policy is always dynamic. Factors influencing foreign policy. Factors influencing foreign policy. Foreign policy decides what kind of relations to have with which country in the international system. But several factors affect foreign policy while it is being decided. Number one, geographical factors or geographical location. The geographical location, size, population, topography, coastline, availability of natural resources determine the foreign policy of a country. The size of a country, its physical features, natural resources, and geographical location have an impact on the foreign policy. The characteristic geographical location of India has given her many neighboring nations. Therefore, while drawing up her foreign policy, the existence of the neighboring nations has to be considered. Population is also an important factor that influence foreign policy. Countries that have a low population do not have enough manpower to use their resources for development. On the other hand, the countries that have a high population have to pay attention to fulfilling the basic needs of their citizens. This can lead to an increased dependence on other countries. This in turn can create a problem in framing an independent foreign policy. Okay. Now recently, Kartarpur corridor is visa-free border crossing and secured corridor connecting the Gurudwara Darbar Sahib in Pakistan to the border with India. This crossing allows Sikh devotees from India to visit Gurudwara in Kartarpur, which is 4.7 km from the border in Pakistan side. Here, the foreign policy benefited Indian Sikhs for geographical locations. Number 2, political system. In a state like India with a democratic political system, the Union Parliament plays a major role in involving foreign policy. The opposition parties try to control the foreign policy by raising questions in the parliament. See, the nature of legislature executive relations is also an influential factor in foreign policy decision making. The harmony between these two, as is there in a parliamentary system, can be a source of strength, and lack of this harmony between the two can be a source of hindrance for the foreign policy makers. Our history shows whenever there is cross-border terrorism by Pakistan or any military conflicts, our politicians have unanimously taken decisions and have spoken in one word. And India has federal system and has to take into account the concerns of the constituent states as the affairs in neighboring nations affect them. Even incidents in Sri Lanka have bearing on Tamil Nadu, and those in Bangladesh may affect West Bengal and the northeastern states. Number 3, economy. In modern times, the economic condition has acquired great importance in deciding foreign policy. It is influenced by the need to establish economic relations with other countries, import, export, participation in world trade to strengthen the economy of the country. India is one of the major exporters of tea, textile, medicines. India is one of the major exporters of tea, textile, medicines in the world, while has major imports of crude oil and electronic items. Likewise, India has set up its foreign policy with the nations of the world to strengthen the economy of country. A country having a strong economy is less dependent on others and thus can have its own independent foreign policy. Means there is a close relationship between a nation's economy and independent foreign policy. A strong economy, a decisive position in international trade, economic independence, etc., have an effect on the foreign policy. The nations that have a developed economy are less dependent on other nations. Stronger the economy of the nation, similar is the influence on the world politics. For example, United States is presently economically strongest nation in the world. So it dictates its foreign policy accordingly in the world. National leadership. Number 4. Much depends on the national leader who formulates the foreign policy of the country. Since the foreign policy of a nation is made and implemented by leaders, statesmen, and diplomats, naturally, foreign policy bears an impression of leaders' talents, experiences, and personalities. The ideas, likings, disliking, attitude, knowledge, skill are influential inputs of foreign policy. See the leaders' statement or diplomats means the president, the prime minister, the foreign minister, the defense minister, the finance minister and the home minister have a role in deciding foreign policy. The person holding these positions try to maintain the continuity in foreign policy. For example, we can see here Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru contributed the policy of non-alignment of India's alignment to India's foreign policy. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee contributed a great deal to improving Sino-Indian relations. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru contributed the policy of non-alignment to India's foreign policy. Means non-alignment does not mean being neutral or indifferent. After the Second World War, Soviet Union and America emerged as the two superpowers. The tense relations between them are referred to as the Cold War. During this period, Soviet Union and America were both trying to pull the newly emerging independent countries into their camps. For example, India. Pandit Nehru clearly put forward India's stand by standing that India would not join any camp. Rather, India hoped for cooperation from all countries. This stand of independence is known as the policy of non-alignment. Thus, non-aligned is another remarkable feature of India's foreign policy. This was the contribution of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Number 5. Administrative factors. Ministry of External Affairs, Foreign Secretary, ambassadors in other countries and diplomatic officers are the administrative factors involved in formulating foreign policy. Even though the decisions are taken by the Prime Minister and the Ministers of External Affairs, the administrative machinery helps them to arrive at that decision. They collect and analyze information and give advice. The role of the National Security Advisor is also important in this task. So, students, today we have learnt about meaning and importance of foreign policy, national interest and foreign policy, factors influencing foreign policy. In short, we have taken preliminary information about foreign policy. Next, means in the second part, we will proceed with objectives of Indian foreign policy. Thank you so much.